And we're live. Hey guys, it's ECRG here with another live stream. I have a very, very special guest with us today. I've got Dr. Matt Wilson, um, and he's going to tell us a little bit about himself here in a second. But first, I want to let you guys know resume review program is still up and running. So if you're interested in having your resume reviewed, check us out there. So send me an email, eliteclinicalgroup@gmail.com. We also have interview prep, career consultation, and all that good stuff. You guys know where to find it. Also, links are in the description. But let's get to the reason why we're here today. I've got Dr. Matt Wilson from a very special company of Umed. Dr. Matt Wilson, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm great. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So for those who don't know about you or your company, could you give us a little bit of background on what you do and, kind of how you came up in this industry?
Yeah, sure. So a bit of background on me first. So, physician by background, I was an anesthesiologist in the NHS and UK military, and but then always kind of had a kind of entrepreneurial itch to scratch around the opportunity to use health data and technology more broadly to advance how we're conducting research in in healthcare. And that's kind of really what got us started on the road to building Umed just over 4 years ago. And Umed's doing something that's really exciting and unique. And there's now lots of places out there where you can go to look at health data in order to be able to try to extract insights and value that can either be used directly for research to publish off of and understand more about a specific disease, or there are some databases out there where you can, and patient communities where you can then engage those patients for clinical trials. But up until now, nobody's been able to have a means to be able to go from that health record data, which is aggregated across lots of different healthcare providers, to being able to contact the patient directly in a scalable and repeatable way. And that's what we do. So we have a platform that allows our life science clients to be able to target very specific groups of patients across our entire healthcare provider network, which covers about 7 million patients now in the UK and US. And we can target patients based on very specific information based on their EHR. So we can, as an example, find patients with COPD on a specific therapy, inhaled therapy of a specific age range, based on that information that's in their health record, and then directly outreach to them on behalf of their healthcare institution that they recognize, in order to be able to engage them, screen them, and then, depending on the nature of what the requirements are from our life science clients, either ask them if they want to be part of a clinical trial, or actually go further and deliver end-to-end observational programs where we can collect additional data from those patients at home. So that's a very kind of quick overview, but let us know if any of that's not clear.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Wilson. We are going to unpack that here in a second. We currently have two people watching us on the live stream. So if you guys are watching and have a question for myself or Dr. Wilson, please drop that in the chat. As you can see in the ticker running across. So feel free, drop us any questions you have about anything we discuss or anything clinical research related, and we'll do our best to tackle those. So Dr. Wilson, you mentioned you started off as in anesthesia, correct? So before you started Umed, what was your clinical research background at that point? Have you done any work in clinical research or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was, my primary practice was as a practicing anesthesiologist, but throughout my whole career, I'd been involved in various different levels of research. So sometimes kind of supporting more kind of structured studies, with inside the institutions that I worked in, and other times more on the investigator side as well, running various different aspects of research, generally not clinical trials, more observational research.
Okay.
And it was that kind of inefficiency that, and just the challenge of trying to run those kind of programs, and seeing the challenges of my colleagues that were running other programs as well, that really kind of got me thinking about how is it that we can make this end-to-end process more efficient, and where are the bottlenecks, right? Because that's, there's huge amounts of progress when we look downstream. So once the patient's actually recruited, there's now an abundance of tools which are doing some fantastic things to help make that research more efficient downstream. But the key bottleneck is actually at the level of the healthcare provider. Like how do you find specific patients and then engage them and then actually go through that process of then consenting and potentially collecting data from them as well. And that's really where that key bottleneck has been historically inside research, in our opinion.
Okay, very good. So my next question is, you've talked about looking at the data, gathering the data to, I guess, get the most applicable patients for these protocols. Are there specific indications which your platform is better or worse for that you have found?
Yeah, and it's interesting. So a lot of it depends on the nature of the healthcare providers that we're working with inside different regions. So in the UK, for example, where we have a large network of general practitioners that are part of Umed, um, the nature of the data with inside general practice in the UK is fantastic for more kind of chronic diseases. So, the great thing about in the UK is that actually there's generally a very consolidated list of medications, demographics, diagnosis codes within inside the primary care record, even when those patients are primarily being treated for their disease in secondary care. And so we can hit, the vast majority of disease areas. Being really honest, there's a couple of areas where within the UK it's a bit more challenging for us. So around oncology, for example, where the nature of oncology means that there's the depth of the data that we have within the primary care record to be able to access is reasonably limited. But outside of that, we've been successfully able to find and deliver programs across a whole range of disease areas, from respiratory, immune, neuro, Parkinson's, and several others. So, really we're disease agnostic, and where we're working with a broader range of healthcare providers in the US, we actually are even more agnostic, because we can touch pretty much every disease area, including oncology.
Okay. So you mentioned, just by the way, we got 3 people in the chat. So if you guys have any questions for myself or Dr. Wilson, for those that are just joining, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. We'll do our best to answer them. So I've got Dr. Wilson with me. He just went over kind of a broad overview of his experience and what UMed can offer. But we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that, like we always do. So my next question regarding that is, who is UMed really for? Is this for sites? Is this for CROs? Is this for sponsors? Who is really going to use this platform?
Yeah, a great question, because the key thing with UMed is actually an enabling tool for all of these different organizations. So although effectively the infrastructure sits at the level of the site, and it's actually not even just sites, it's actually healthcare providers more broadly, where often they're not acting as study sites, but they're often acting as referral sites as well. So we very often support studies where there is a sort of hub and spoke model, where we are supporting a specific site, but actually we're recruiting from a much broader network of healthcare providers around that region. And so there's that aspect to it. So the infrastructure aspect of UMed sits at the healthcare provider, in our network there. However, the value of this is really across all different stakeholders. So for life sciences, and whether that's the sponsor or the CRO, there's huge opportunity to obviously help deliver their programs more efficiently, whether that's within R&D and running clinical studies, or whether that's about building targeted data sets from specific patient cohorts in order to be able to inform their pre and post-market activity. And that, as I say, that can either be working with a sponsor directly or with a CRO. And for patients, it's a great opportunity to engage with a much broader range of research in their own homes in a very effective, easy to use way, and also get the opportunity to really get rapid feedback in terms of how their contributions have actually resulted in, new knowledge, new publications, because the way the Umed platform works is that we can automatically re-engage these patients, with summaries of publications and insights that we've built, as a result of it from the researchers we've worked with, and patients absolutely love that, and it helps really drive our ongoing engagement with disease populations.
Okay, so my next question is, because my audience is not as well versed typically in the clinical research process and patient recruitment and all that stuff. So let's really break it down here. Who, I guess, who is going to reach out first, or who is going to utilize the UMed Platinum platform first? Can you kind of walk us through a workflow of how this would go?
Yeah, definitely, and maybe in a bit I can throw up some examples of this actually in terms of
Yeah, that'd be great.
so we can do that. But I'll just walk through it first. So what we do is when we have a researcher come and approach us, and that can either be, we've worked with academics, we work with industry, and they're looking for a specific group of patients, and actually sometimes that's for a very specific clinical trial that they have in mind and maybe already recruiting to, where they have very specific inclusion-exclusion criteria and they're looking for patients. Or it may be that they actually are looking to build a kind of very specific data set in an observational way from a specific patient population. So they're not necessarily looking to run a trial, but what they're looking to do is capture some key data from a target group of patients. And those are the kind of two primary ways in which we can support. So what we'll do is we'll run a query across all of the different healthcare providers in our network, so across those 7 million plus patients, to identify how many patients we can find that match those specific criteria, based on those inclusion and exclusion criteria. What we then do is work with the sponsor and or CRO to consolidate all of the relevant information about that particular project. If it's about building a specific data set, then we can actually support the development of a relevant protocol and submission to ethics. And once that's done and all inputted inside our platform, the key individuals within the institutions where we've identified a relevant patient group are contacted by email. Within that email, there's a link to our platform that then takes them through. They can review all of the information about the study. They can actually see the list of patients with all of their identifiable information in order to be able to review them and confirm that they're appropriate. And then as soon as they've done that and they've given us authorization, we can then contact those patients on their behalf. So what that looks like is the patient receives primarily, and we could do it through multiple different channels, but primarily via text message. And that text message from the patient's point of view is coming from their recognized healthcare provider, but it's powered by us under the hood. And that allows us to present a little bit of information about the study, but then again, embed another web link, which then takes that patient out to a web browser on their smartphone. And again, if they don't have a smartphone, we have ways to be able to support that. And we can then take those patients through a study-specific workflow. So we can provide them information about the study. We can screen them through automated screening questionnaires. And in some circumstances, we can actually remotely consent them and then do longitudinal follow-up, linking the data that we're collecting from the patient at home to data that's in the health record. And in that way, we can very effectively convert patients either into existing clinical studies or run standalone programs in order to be able to support the needs of specific teams inside our research clients.
Wow. So you guys said you can even consent the patients, so through your platform as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, and let me give you a kind of real example of this. So we're running one program, which is just wrapping up soon, actually, with a med device company in the UK, which is a respiratory medical device, and they were needing to recruit over 700 patients into a trial where they were going to be using this device for a 14-day period. One, to kind of support medical device evaluation, also to allow them to be able to capture more data to support the algorithms that underpinned their medical device. And so what we were able to do is actually target, based on the health record, a range of different diseases, respiratory diseases, some common, some much more rare, engage those patients in the process that I've just described. We then remotely consented those patients, arranged for that medical device to be delivered to their home address, captured patient-reported data in terms of questionnaires for that 14-day period whilst the patient was using the device, and then linked all of that data back to data that was in their health record with patient consent, and provided that consolidated study data set back to the sponsor, the med device manufacturer. And within, and actually the rate determining step in that study was primarily around the number of devices early on that we had available. And we're now we're about to hit the target in the next couple of months, and that's been running for 9 months. So, and we could have probably gone a lot quicker as well, and it was within a pretty small subset of patients, subset of healthcare providers that we're working with in the UK. So it really demonstrates that whole end-to-end piece, and the beauty of it is that from the GP's point of view, the GPs that we were running it with, there was no activity at all. It wasn't burdening them. They didn't have to undertake, they didn't have to bring in more nurses, allocate time, have additional cost overheads. The entire process ran end to end for them, without any action needing to be taken at at the site level.
Okay. Very good. So my next question is, so if this is all done online, I guess, over the internet, kind of, this is like a internet-based platform, how long does it actually take to identify these patients and move from that step on once you've identified the patient? How long does it actually take to identify these patients?
So I mean, we can go from targeting the patients to engaging and recruiting them within a 24-hour period, if we've done it that quickly before. And again, the great thing is there's no limitation in terms of the rate at which we can outreach to patients, because it's digital engagement through text message. So in another example of a broader study that we were supporting, we've now engaged, I think, over 30,000 patients and recruited over 3,500 of those patients.
Wow.
into this observational program.
Wow.
So there was, and again, that's happened in a kind of 6-month period. And in principle, we could have engaged all of those patients in one go, but actually, from the study's perspective, they didn't want that, because they would just have too many patients coming through in one go. So there's real potential here to accelerate that end-to-end process. In reality, for a lot of studies, what we need to do, once we've started working with a specific sponsor or CRO, there's a need to go through resubmit to ethics around this, in order to be able to essentially approve us as a tool to actually engage these patients. So there's a little bit of a lag there, but effectively we can front all that work normally. So by the time they want us to start recruiting or finding some specific patients, all of that kind of upstream work in terms of ethics resubmissions is all done. Ethics IRB is all done.
Okay. So that was good. So we got a couple people watching live right now. So we've got Dr. Wilson on with us today, CEO and founder of Umed platform. So drop your questions below. It's very rare we got a CEO on, guys, that you can just ask any question you want to. So this is definitely one to take advantage of, especially if you are interested in patient recruitment. So speaking of that, why? I've talked about a lot on this channel before that, patient recruitment is something definitely to talk about in your interviews if you have experience with it, because it's definitely a huge problem. CROs, sponsors, even sites, it's just a problem across the industry is getting enough patients enrolled in your studies. Can you speak to why it's a problem and I guess your solution for combating that?
Yeah, and speaking more broadly, it's been a kind of perennial problem, right? And part of the reason why is that there's just so many steps in the process that involve lots of different people and a lot of activity from people that are normally very busy themselves, where this is a task that has to be done in addition to their normal clinical day job. And I would take a step back and say that, over the last few years, there's been, broadly two approaches that have been taken to trial recruitment. One was the always traditional route, right, which is you find your sites, and then the sites that you're working with, you instruct the PI to go and find those patients out of their clinical caseload. And we know that doesn't work for a whole, that's not fair. It does work, but it's often a lot more challenging than people expect. And one reason for that is that when you're only working with one site, even though they may be a center that's bringing patients in from a region around it, often the actual active caseload is quite limited, and actually a lot of those patients may be being provided treatment with inside other regional secondary or tertiary care centres. So you're missing an awful lot of patients. The second problem is actually just getting the quality interaction with the patient. When the patient comes into clinic and they're looking to, and they've got a disease and they're speaking to their physician or nurse, that's where their mindset is, right? They want to understand more about how they can, what their treatment is and how they can improve. They're not really thinking about clinical trials. So when you then push these ideas on them of like, oh, by the way, do you want to be part of this clinical trial? A lot of the time it's not, the patients aren't in the right place to really consume that information. And so because of that, historically site-based recruitment has always been a challenge. So the other way that people have been doing it in recent years has been direct to consumer. So, building, disintermediating those healthcare providers and going straight to the consumer, either through digital channels like Facebook, and finding these patients. There's been a lot of people doing Facebook kind of advertising for clinical trials, and other kind of direct to consumer channels as well. Patient communities is obviously a big one as well, where you're going to charities or patient advocacy groups who have already got an audience with the disease that you're looking for. The problem with those is, one, they're very biased, because the type of patients that you get in patient advocacy groups and part of charitable disease memberships, membership groups are not representative of the vast majority of people with that disease. So when you're looking at representation, you often really struggle. And the second is you're kind of going back to the same pool of patients again and again. So you end up having a much more limited group of patients that actually want to be part of these programs. And when you're going direct to consumer, when it comes to Facebook and other kind of direct to consumer marketing channels, there is success there, but again, the problem is you get a huge, the funnel is very, very wide. So you might get lots of people saying, yes, I'm interested, but actually, do those patients actually have the criteria that they say they do? Do they? And so, you have to target it as really broad. So for all of those reasons, it's actually really challenging to actually get a stream of patients that actually fit those criteria into the trial sites. And what you end up doing is creating a lot of work often for those trial sites, because the patients that are brought through are generally not the right patients. So those are the kind of two traditional ways, and just the data bears out the fact that it's very, very hard to do. So our approach is, again, without laboring it, is just to say, well, why don't we automate those processes that normally happen at the level of the healthcare provider? And that has a couple of effects. One, that it reduces the burden, so we can breadth the number of healthcare providers and the reach. And the second is the way that we're engaging patients as well, gives us the opportunity to be able to tailor content and engage patients at a time where they are much more likely to be able to absorb that information and consider being part of these studies. And that's reflected in the conversion rates that we're seeing.
Okay, great. Thank you for that summary there. We've got a question, and I should have, mentioned this earlier. I was looking at the wrong screen here. Um, but we got a question from Priyanka Oval. Wants to discuss the scope of clinical research and data management industry in coming years in India. So do you and your platform work in India? And if so, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we don't at the moment, and but it's an area that we actually have had a few discussions actually with some health record provider vendors in India. It's not somewhere where we've decided to kind of actively focus on in the near term. However, it's absolutely an area where we want to be focusing on in the future. I think part of the challenge for an organization like ours is it is actually the nature of the infrastructure and to a degree the fragmentation of the infrastructure within India from a healthcare and health record perspective makes it quite challenging to be able to build a significant patient population. And I think the lack of standardization that at least I understand there to be around some of the health records makes it a bit more challenging for us to focus early on kind of moving into that region. However, I think more generally we're seeing, and again, if you look at the statistics, like countries like India are doing exceptionally well, and generally often much better than Western countries in actually recruiting to clinical trials and delivering them. So I think we'll continue to see kind of more and more progress towards, and shift towards, countries like India delivering more and more studies.
Okay. So just a follow up to that, you mentioned that you are, looking into India and want to eventually, get into India. Um, why is Let me say, why is that not like a priority that you want to do like instantaneously? And I guess why, yeah, if you could just talk about that, and we'll ask that after.
Yeah, no. So a lot of it, unfortunately, is just like you've got to pick some, like pick
Right.
where you're gonna go early, and then and you've just got to make some decisions because the world's pretty big, and there's and so we have to start somewhere, and we're still certainly a young organisation in the grand scheme of clinical research. So we have ambitions to be able to go much further, but you know we've had to, UK was obviously where I came from, so I had a lot of and the early members of the team, so there was an awful lot of institutional knowledge around how the UK operated, which was very helpful early on. And the US is kind of needed as a kind of early focus as well to be able to demonstrate that we can deliver in that market. But from there, I think there's we intend to kind of broaden ourselves much further.
Okay. Um, so I'm based in the USA. I'm based on the East Coast. So typically my knowledge and my channel has to do a lot with, USA clinical research. But obviously there's clinical research being done all over the world. So I love having guests like you on, that have a more international background that can kind of speak to how clinical research is done, overseas. Um, all right. So let's go on to the next question here. We got a question from Ismail Gassem. Is it possible for a GP in UK to be owner of clinical research site, and is it easy to get studies? You want to speak to that, Dr. Wilson?
Yeah, no, it's a great question actually, and it kind of comes from so a lot of the GPs, again, forgive me if people kind of understand this already, but in the UK there's often a kind of misunderstanding from people outside of the UK that the NHS is kind of one entity, and it's not. It's actually, although there's a single payer, actually there's essentially a lot of the organisations within inside the NHS, that whether they be hospitals or GPs, are actually acting effectively as individual businesses with a single payer. So these organisations have a lot of autonomy. The problem for GPs traditionally has been they're just they're incredibly busy in the UK. The kind of GPs are the entry point into the healthcare system, and there's a lot of burden being placed on them. So there's generally a shortage of time in order to be able to think and engage in clinical research. Some of those GP practices have have decided that they're going to have a research focus, and therefore they do run studies directly. They are clinical trial sites, and they do it very effectively. It obviously depends on the nature of the study. They're going to be doing studies that are clearly more related to kind of general practice and general practice populations, but yeah, they absolutely do. And actually the UK is a fantastic place to run research, not generally, but particularly with inside primary care, because there's a huge range of patients out there that are very accessible. The problem generally has been, how do we empower that much broader set of GPs to engage in clinical research when they may not have the expertise, and they don't have the time? And again, that's where our platform comes in, because we can take over an awful lot of that burden, allow them to be able to engage in research, even if they're not as a trial site, but as a referring site to a trial site that may be geographically located a few miles away. We can allow them to do that in a very effective way.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Wilson, for that. I do not know anything about owning sites, even in the US, and certainly not in the UK. I leave that to Dan Sfera, the clinical trials guru. That's his expertise. And certainly, I don't know anything about getting studies either. So thank
Yeah, and
you.
it was worth saying as well, sorry, because I didn't answer that second part of the question, which is it easy to get studies? And again, the UK's good in some ways, because what we have is this concept of something called the CRNs, which are like essentially government organization or government funded organizations, called clinical research networks. That's what they stand for, and they're government funded. And if you, as a sponsor, want to run a study, you can actually go to these regional research networks, and they will help you find and match you to relevant trial sites, at no cost. So, because they're kind of government funded organizations. So the GPs themselves don't have to kind of go out and pitch for work, if you like. It kind of comes to them when it comes to research through the CRNs. Again, though, there's still challenges, because even when you're going through the CRNs, there's, it's often difficult for even a group of GPs to be attractive to a sponsor that wants to try to run, a significant study at scale, within a particular region. So there's still challenges there, but again, that's part of the reason that having kind of our infrastructure tied into this can really help supercharge that whole end-to-end process.
Okay. Dr. Wilson, I don't believe we talked about what countries your platform is actually operating in. I know we mentioned UK and USA, but are there any others?
Yeah, so and fortunately, we're just getting up and running in the US. So our focus early on has been in the UK, because we wanted to demonstrate that we can do it there. Our first US essentially healthcare partners are coming on board in the next couple of months. So we're aiming to start running studies with them, certainly by the second half of this year, kind of July time. So that's really exciting. And Australia is actually another area where we've kind of got access in place, and again, we're aiming to start running our first studies there within the next couple of months. So we're kind of across 3 continents. Our plan here on is to spread further into the US, but also into Europe and then Asia Pac as well. Actually, again, a lot of it is it's a big place and it takes time, and because of the nature of what we're doing, we have to and the need to be able to actually access health data from the healthcare provider partners. A lot of that, is nuanced and changes depending on where we are in the world. So it's going to take us a bit of time to be able to kind of drive those relationships across the whole world. But UK, US, and Australia is where we're starting.
Okay. So piggybacking off of that, how do you decide which countries you want to go into next? I mean, UK makes sense. You're based out of there, so that makes a lot of sense. But how do you decide next, like where you want to go to next?
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of it I think is just related to Well, a couple of things actually. I think so. So I mean, one is the kind of demand, right? So where's the, where are the key challenges? And the other is actually more around the nature of the healthcare provider infrastructure within inside that country. So for us,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Okay.
as I mentioned, there's a need for us to be able to work with a healthcare provider to access the health record data in order to be able to do what we do, and that change both in terms of technically there's different barriers in different countries, but also more sort of philosophically and from a legal data compliance standpoint, there are differences between different countries as well. But interestingly, even with inside the EU, which is governed by a single set of data regulation called GDPR, even with inside the EU, the interpretation of that within different countries varies quite significantly, and you find certain, European countries are much more conservative in terms of how they interpret that versus others, where there's a more focus on interoperability and the need to actually, use this health data to drive better patient care. And it's just a lot of it's just cultural. So that has quite a big effect in terms of where we focus our efforts. As we look to grow the network further.
Okay. Thank you for that, Ismail. We're going to get to your next question here in 1 second. We had 4 people listening live. We got Dr. Wilson here. He's answering any and all questions that you guys have about clinical research. I'm here as well, obviously. Uh, Dr. Wilson, can you tell us where they can find out more about UMed, just for those that are listening real quick?
Yeah, sure. So best place is our website, umed.io, umed.io. So have a look there. There's plenty of information there and all of our contact details should you want to reach out and speak to us directly. So that's the best place to find us.
Okay, thank you. And then piggyback into the different countries. If you could snap your fingers and tomorrow, have your platform in any country, which country would you choose and why?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it also depends on how much coverage you would get, right? So if you fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you think of it, the US is still a very important place to run and execute research.
Why?
And
Why do you say that? Because there's only 330 million people in the USA, and
correct.
the lady before asked about India, there's over 1 billion people in India. There's like 2 billion in China, or close to 2 billion. So why?
Yeah, a lot of this comes down to the nature of healthcare economics, in the sense of although there's only 330 million people in the US, in terms of how much they contribute to the revenue of pharma companies that are spending $1 billion to $2 billion to get a drug to market, is much greater than the relative size of the patient population.
Okay.
So that then has an effect, because actually for a pharma company wanting to bring a drug to market and wanting to do that, they have to get FDA approval. To get FDA approval, you generally need high quality data, and it's not just about FDA, it's also about the payers as well, right? You have to demonstrate that the efficacy of your drug is applicable to your patient population that you're giving it to, right? Which varies country to country. So there's a need to focus on the US in order to be able to get the appropriate FDA approvals, so you can market and authorize and then engage payers to get this drug to market inside the US. Because if you've invested $1 billion or more getting that specific drug to market, you need to be able to know that you can that you're going to be able to sell that drug in and reach the patients that need it inside that patient population. So unfortunately or fortunately, it depends on which way you think of it, I suppose, depending on whether in the US or otherwise. It's an important place to do research. And I also think there's still a lot of intellectual academic sort of capital within inside the US as well. A lot of the big research institutions, well-regarded research institutions, are are based there, and a lot of the key academics that are running research are based there as well. So, is that changing? Like, absolutely. There's a huge need to imperative to be able to drive research across a much broader set of countries and a much broader patient population. But as I say, for the time being, there's the US is still a key place to do medical research.
Right, right, right. I imagine, developing relationships and partnerships, with the CROs. We got a lot of CROs here, a lot of
Exactly.
pharma companies based here or have, huge headquarters in the USA as well. So I imagine it's more than just the patient population, but also about those strategic relationships and partnerships.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, and it's about and there's a reason even why there's such a huge focus in the northeast of the US around medical research. Boston and the surrounding areas, and
Yes,
it's the fact that there's just a lot of those key people that you need there and key organizations that you need there in order to be able to move forward these research programs. Again, I mean, I think the changes that we've seen over the last couple of years in terms of the need to physically be down the road from these organizations is not so important as it was.
correct.
But so that's a great thing, right? And I think just collaboration more broadly around trials is key. So my hope is that we'll see a much broader, uh, both concept, conceiving research and then delivering it will become much more international. So yeah, so that's a short answer. In terms of another country, I mean, I if we could go to India and flick a switch and access, have access to 1 billion people in order to be able to drive research, I mean, that would be transformational. That would be
Right.
absolutely incredible. And and the problem is that the infrastructure there is just quite fragmented at the moment, and it's also just quite daunting, I think, as well for companies like us to try to tackle that when we don't have a strong understanding of the market. So and a lot of the capital as well, that comes and supports companies like ours, is based out of the UK or US. So there's a familiarity with operating there that perhaps isn't. But I mean, if we could do that, I mean, that would be it would be completely transformational. Imagine if you could engage any of those billion patients instantaneously, not just for clinical trials, but for to capture detailed understanding of standards of care, what the experiences of those patients are within certain disease states, and build the data that we need to be able to move forward research more broadly. It would be transformational.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you can't even really describe how transformational that would be. It's just so amazing.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so that was cool. Ismail has another question here. Not sure if we'll be able to answer that, but Ismail asked, "What is the average income of a clinical research site which runs 2 to 4 studies per year?" And I
Yeah,
think,
I mean, it's a really difficult question to answer that, actually, and I can't give a good answer. Not because I don't want to, but because I don't necessarily know is the it's really hard. I mean, there's some things that I can point you to though, which is um, the income for at the organizational level is not necessarily as good as you think it is, right? So I think, and it also depends on the type of trial, the type of institution. If you're a small GP surgery running, a handful of small studies a year, um, versus a large scale oncology study being run within a specific cancer network, the economics are very, very different. And again, if it's more academic versus a pivotal phase 3 study for a specific molecule, then again the economics are quite different. Um, But the one thing I would say is that if you look at the numbers I don't have it to hand, but there's some useful articles that talk about this. Most sites actually generally lose money on the studies that they're participating in because there's so much overhead associated with being a clinical trial site. So although they're kind of bidding in for that, there's a much broader set of burden that often isn't captured when they're billing that back to the CRO, for example. So a lot of trial sites do it because they actually want to do it to support their own physicians and investigators, because it's a good for their brand, right? It's good to have other physicians and organizations then want to work with that healthcare organization and trial site. So it's a good thing, and also a lot of it's just driven by individuals. Like a lot of it's driven by the passion of individual researchers inside those institutions to want to do these studies. So I know that's not a particularly good answer to that question at all. For some sites, it can be a pretty pretty lucrative exercise alongside the clinical care, and of course there are some private institutions that just run clinical trials, right? They only they're set up just as clinical trial sites, particularly for early phase clinical studies, but that's very, very different from what I would kind of think of as traditional clinical research with inside caregiving institutions.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for your insights on that, Dr. Wilson. Ismail, I have no idea even what to say to that. I wouldn't even know for US sites either. Um, quite frankly, a lot of the places that I go and monitor at are not small clinical trials run by, one doctor and one or two site staff members. I'm going to hospitals, institutions for most of my monitoring, and that's just I may have 10, 15 sites a year or so. So that's just with my small sample size. But I have no idea how much those big institutions would make in research. Honestly, I don't even look at the how the money flows, in and out of my organization. That's not really, my job or expertise. So I really have no idea where to start. I think that's a good question. Maybe you should ask Dan Sfera over at the Clinical Trials Guru, because he deals with sites. He owns a few sites himself, so he'd probably be able to, point you in a better direction as far as getting an actual solid answer there. Shout out Dan. He always shows love to the channel and a lot of support. So, yeah, good question so far. So if anybody else has any questions, we've got about 10 more minutes or so, maybe like 8 or so minutes with Dr. Wilson here. I want to be
There is actually on that. I was just trying to find. There is a paper actually, like an open paper that you can access, which talks about cost around clinical trials. I'll see if I can find the link. You should be able to find it on PubMed.
Okay, maybe you can drop it here in the chat.
Yeah, I'll do my best. Let me just, whilst you're thinking, whilst the next question's coming, I'll see if I can just dig that out. It's been
okay. So yeah, we want to be respectful of Dr. Wilson's time. So if you guys got any last questions, go ahead and put them in now. I've got a question for you, Dr. Wilson. Just while you're looking at that.
No, that's okay. I'll multitask. Go for
it. My question for you is, we've talked about what countries you want to go into in the future. We've talked about what kind of opportunities you've been able to take advantage of over the past few years. But what does success look like for you over the next year?
Yeah, I mean, so the key thing for us is about trying to create some impact and change. I left clinical medicine as an anesthesiologist in order to be able to try to affect some change at scale. Because as privileged as I was to be able to, as much as I loved the job of treating patients, you were always treating one patient at a time. And, the exciting thing about clinical research more broadly, outside of what we're doing, is those insights and the new knowledge that you're building through research can impact hundreds, thousands, millions of people. If that knowledge ends up creating a change in the way people are treated. So I think for us as what I see as a research enabling organization, that's the key focus for us. So if we can drive access to as many patients as we can, and allow and then offer those patients the opportunity to be part of as much research as possible in the easiest way possible, so that the super clever people and researchers that sit behind all of those studies can actually build some knowledge that can have a positive impact on care, then that's job done for us.
Very good, very good. Okay, so I want to add some value here to my listeners. So a lot of my listeners are people that are looking to get experience in clinical research or just trying to break in for the first time. Um, most of the people that are at least active on the channel are not project directors or people high up in the CROs. So these are people that are looking to get their first job, or maybe they have their first job and looking to go on to a second job in the clinical research industry. So I want to provide some value for them. How can somebody who's, I guess, based in the UK or in one of your countries that you work in get involved with you guys at Umed?
Yeah, and I mean, there's a whole bunch of ways that you can get involved, right? So I mean, one is, if there's either trial sites you're working with, or study sponsors that you're working with, or CROs that you're working with, who are having challenges around whether it's recruitment or just challenges more broadly around their clinical programs. Use it as an opportunity to kind of connect us, because we can then hopefully start supporting the programs that you're involved in, and indirectly we can kind of work together through those programs. So I mean, that's one thing. The other thing is there's I'd encourage your listeners to kind of just think about the experience, the possibility of experience outside of kind of a traditional the traditional kind of job roles that perhaps they've been thinking about. And not just UMed, there's a huge number now of technology driven research companies that are addressing key problems in clinical research at various different points. And I think there's a real opportunity there to get some experience with those kind of companies, even if it's in an entry level position around ClinOps, and helping organizations like us, for example, coordinate and deliver the programs that we're supporting. Then even if you decide you don't want to stay in this world, then I think that's a great set of experience to be able to take back, into the wider research world. I hope that's useful. I hope that's hopefully that's what you were looking for there.
Yeah. I guess more specifically, are you guys hiring in some of these countries that you're working in, UK, Australia, USA?
Yeah, we are. Yeah, so reach out. I mean, there's a range of different. There's a whole set of programs that we're going to be delivering in the second half of this year, which we're now finalising. So there's a little bit of uncertainty on our side about exactly who we need to hire around those specific programs. But there is an absolute need for us to be hiring, particularly in the UK in the short term, and then sort of medium term, again, second half of this year in the US as well. So, if you're interested, fire your CV into us via the website, and we'll take a look. So we're definitely on the hire.
Okay, excellent. So they would go to the website umed.io, and you guys have a career page or something on there, like a career.
I think you probably I think we're in the process of trying to do it. We did have a career page, and then it got changed in the new version of the website, I think. So the if you just fire an email to info@umed.io, it will be triaged and it will go to the right person. So just introduce who you are, why you've contacted, reference this, where you heard about us, and it will get to the right person.
Okay. So that's great. So if you guys are listening and are in need of a position or just want to network with UMed, send your CV to info@umed.io, and it will get taken to the right person. You heard it here from Dr. Wilson himself. Um, so thanks, Dr. Wilson. You've been so generous with your time today. We're here wrapping up here. Do you have any last words you'd like to say about the platform or your time today, or anything we didn't get to discuss that you want to say before we wrap up?
Hey, I don't think so. Just thank you for your time. As I say, I think the key thing is if anything you heard here was interesting, or you just want to find out more, get in touch, and we can happily dive into the detail. But really appreciate your time.
Okay. Thank you for your time, Dr. Wilson. I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast here. It doesn't look like we have any other questions. Hope you guys enjoyed this. If you have any questions about this, you can email me, eliteclinicalgroup@gmail.com. Of course, we talked about the resume review program, interview prep, career consultation, or just normal questions. If you have any questions, you can email me there as well. Thank you, everybody who's been listening. Dang, how do you say this? Oluwabunmi says, thank you both. Thank you for listening. I'm gonna go ahead and end this, guys, and we'll see you. Maybe I'll go live next week for a Q&A. We'll see. But anyway, guys, take care.